They told him that Sophia was merely an ancient myth and a poetic symbol of wisdom, a forgotten tale of a goddess belonging to lost temples and filthy slaves. But what if she were not forgotten by time, but by design? Because in the hidden tradition, Sophia was never just a myth. She was a returning event, not something prophesied in the distant future. But for the times we are living in now, the Gnostics didn't describe their return as merely a dramatic event in the cosmos, but as something very close, something that would appear beforehand within human consciousness. You've probably already felt the symbols. That strange sense that something is happening, that feeling, as the world becomes more chaotic, that something is hiding in preparation for a great revelation. And this is where it gets even deeper. There were teachings connected to Jesus, kept outside of official history, that suggest that before Sophia returns, something great changes, not only in the world, but in the inner world of humanity. This is not a modern prophecy, and it's not about specific dates. These are signs, spiritual conditions, described in the ancient language of symbols, that seem to point to that time. And once you open your eyes, the signs are everywhere, especially in the silent way your soul is pulling you towards something deeper, without you even knowing why. In this video, you won't just hear a story about Sophia. You'll learn the signs, linked to the hidden teachings of Jesus that were said to appear before his return, the prerequisite of Christ consciousness. Because Sophia was never just about one event. It was about the restoration of the divine feminine, the peace of Christ returning to the inner light and blessing the world for a time, beyond the reach of the lower forces, known as the archonies. So if the Gnostics were right, then Sophia doesn't return gently. She returns like light entering a room that was built to keep you asleep. And once that happens, everything that rests on darkness is exposed. To understand these signs, you have to understand something deeper. Christianity not only hid Sophia, it also repackaged Jesus, presenting him in a form that was far from who he really was. Because in the earlier Gnostic teachings, Jesus was never trying to create a religion. He was revealing a map of liberation for those ready to remember. And the Gnostics weren't trying to start a new religion either. They were trying to protect something the church could never fully contain. The kingdom is not coming. It's not arriving later. It's already here within you, awakened through gnosis and direct inner knowledge. And in these hidden teachings, Sophia appears again and again, not as a side character, but as a cosmic intelligence, open to the story of liberation, itself wisdom, the feminine aspect of knowing that comes not through logic, but through recognition. Sophia's story begins with her lineage, a reach beyond the harmony of the pleroma that triangulated, the fraction, and gave birth to the world of the demiurge. But that's what most people don't realize. The Gnostics did not treat Sophia's story as a tragedy. They treated it as a prophecy, not about dates, but about stages, a rhythm in awareness, a cycle, to fall fragmentation, oblivion, and then a return. And in texts like the Apocryphon of John, Sophia is not just the one who falls. She is also the one who initiates the restoration, breathing remembrance back into humanity. That is where the connection with Jesus becomes impossible to ignore, because in Gnostic cosmology, Christ and Sophia are not strangers. They are counterparts, two currents of the same restoration. Christ as divine light, Sophia as divine wisdom. One awakens the vision, the other awakens understanding. One reveals the prison, the other reveals the door. And if this seems unfamiliar, it's because this is precisely the layer that history has tried to uncover. After the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library, the hidden Gnostic texts, we realized how broad early Christianity was. Not one story, but many. And some of those stories were too liberating to keep. If people learn that awakening doesn't require permission, if they learn that the divine space was already within them, then the fear-based control collapses. So Sophia was pushed into the shadows. The feminine fostering of divinity was reduced to silence. Suspicion, temptation, or error. You can see the manifestations of this distortion everywhere. How wisdom becomes dangerous, how intuition is wounded, and how the heart is treated as a weakness. But Sophia never disappeared. She went underground into the symbols. For that silent pressure you felt in your own life, a sense that the world is loud, but dark. And now throughout the modern world, something ancient is resurfacing, not through the trappings of the New Age, but because the cycle is turning again. Because once you truly see, the shadows become indelible. Which means the question is no longer whether Sophia is real. The real question is, if Sophia were returning, what would the shadows look like? This is the first thing you have to understand. Sophia's return is not a woman descending from heaven, not a savior in the biblical sense, but a shift in the structure of consciousness and the return of a lost intelligence that the world is running without. And when that intelligence begins to return, reality behaves differently. Initially, it's subtle. Time feels strange. The bosses you once ignored become impossible to see. Things that were hidden come into view, not just in the world, but in people, because Sophia, in the Gnostic view, is not merely wisdom as an idea. Sophia is wisdom as a living current, an aeon, a faculty of perception that sees what the intellect cannot touch. This is why shadows do not appear as dramatic events. They appear as changes in what you can tolerate, changes in what your soul refuses to aspire to anymore. The world may run on in deception until wisdom returns. Then the lies begin to collapse under their own weight. That's why Sophia's mythology matters. Not because it's history, but because it describes the inner workings of awakening. But what the Gnostics were really encoding is a cycle. Wisdom descends into matter, then wisdom awakens within matter, then wisdom rises to the source, carrying all that it has learned. And the deepest implication is this: Sophia does not return to the world. It returns through you, the human vessel, through the shadow within you that has survived the darkness like an emerald under water. That is why tradition called it epineuia, inner synthesis, because Sophia is the part of you that can see through the illusion without needing permission. So what does it mean to say that Jesus revealed signs before Sophia's return? It means that the inner tradition didn't just speak of commands. It spoke of patterns, symbols, and conditions. It describes what happens when the world reaches the limit of its instability, which is what we are experiencing now, and when wisdom begins to resurface. And the moment you understand this, it becomes easier to see why these teachings were hidden. Because when wisdom returns, authority loses its power, not through violence or force, but through irrelevance. A system can only control you through fear and confusion. But Sophia dissolves both. She brings clarity, not information. And that clarity prevents you from reacting, chasing after, and feeding illusions with your attention. You begin to see the invisible contract behind the world. You can find comfort while giving up the truth. You can find approval while abandoning your inner wisdom. You can rest assured while you sleep. Sophia is the force within you that eventually says no. And when enough people reach that threshold, the collective begins to change. Now this is where the signs begin. These are not predictions, they are not dates. They are markers indicating that this current of wisdom is growing, again in the human field. One sign is that people can no longer tolerate the high-level lifestyle. So things that used to feel good start to feel unexpected. The fake conversations, fake people, shady jobs and relationships. Another sign is that when the world becomes louder, faster and more chaotic, you feel a leap toward tranquility. Not escapism, but an inner wisdom that your reaction and your attention are fueling the chaos. As if something ancient within you knew that if you don't become silent internally, you won't hear the signal. And the third sign is the most incomprehensible, because it can feel like confusion, disorientation, even collapse. But it's not collapse, it's correction. The moment the false structure begins to break down so that wisdom can enter. But to understand what this sign really is, you have to see it the way the Gnostics did. Not as a crisis, but as a door. And if you've been feeling this crack lately, you may already be facing it. Because if Sophia's return is real, if it's not just poetry, then there has to be a mechanism, a way in which wisdom moves, a way in which it breaks through the emerald. And it is here that tradition becomes precise, almost like a map. Because what Jesus revealed through parables, coded hints, symbolic language, was never just what to believe, it was what to perceive. How to recognize the moment when the inner world is changing. How to recognize when the soul has reached a threshold. In Gnostic understanding, Sophia returns when something in humanity becomes ready to hold her back again. Wisdom cannot enter a mind burdened with noise. It cannot dwell within a heart committed to self-deception. And it cannot live in someone who is constantly performing. Sophia doesn't force herself. She arrives when the internal conditions are right. And the signs that Jesus revealed are essentially those conditions, the markers that the inner ground is fertile again. But here lies the paradox. When Sophia returns, it rarely feels like a return. It feels like collapse, chaos, and disruption. Because wisdom doesn't appear as comfort. Wisdom appears as truth, and truth has a side effect. She shatters illusions, especially comfortable ones. Many people think that the divine feminine signifies gentleness, kindness, flow, and beauty. But Sophia is not just a trend. Sophia is the intelligence that burns. She is the voice within you that says this is false, this is empty, this is not you. So, if we are going to talk about signs, let's talk about signs that aren't always comfortable. Because the first signs of wisdom are not illusion, they are wisdom. The end of pretense, the death of your capacity to tolerate a lie. These are not just signs. They are spiritual markers encoded long ago, because the inner mechanics of awakening don't change simply because centuries pass. Destiny 1 is that the soul becomes allergic to the surface. This is where it all begins. You start to lose interest in what once impressed you, not because you're better than anyone else, but because your inner self can no longer feed on empty things. You can still laugh, still succeed, but something inside you rejects the false life. That's why people call this stage despair. But it's not despair, it's wisdom returning. It's Sophia pulling you away from distraction, because she knows that if you remain entertained, you will remain desperate. Destiny 2 is that meaning becomes stronger than pleasure. This is subtle, but it changes your whole life. The world tries to keep you chasing stimulation because stimulation keeps you externally controlled. But when Sophia moves, you start wanting something deeper. Truth, depth, and real presence. And this hunger becomes stronger than appetite, stronger than ambition, stronger than the need to be liked. Destiny 3 is that old identities begin to collapse. This is unsettling, and this is why so many people feel disoriented now. Because Sophia doesn't return to preserve the old you, she returns to restore the real you. And restoration always begins with dismantling. You develop roles, you develop masks, you develop relationships built on performance, and it feels like death, but it's the beginning of coherence. And it's exactly as we said before, it's not a collapse, it's a correction. Now the fourth sign, and when this appears, it's the point of no return, because it reveals the true nature of the world you lived in. The place of sleeping and waking, a place that most people never reach, but for those who do, they never return. But to recognize it, you first have to understand why this happens. Why Sophia's return not only changes your emotions, it changes how reality responds to you. Because when wisdom rises within you, the external world doesn't feel the same. And once that happens, everything changes. This is where it stops being theory. Because the return of Sophia isn't something you just understand. It's something you begin to cooperate with. And that starts with a raw realization. Most people don't lose their connection to wisdom because they're bad. They lose it because they're constantly distracted by the internal noise that keeps them reacting, performing, searching, and proving. And Sophia can't return to a mind that lives in reaction mode. So if you've felt slowed down lately, if you felt the world moving faster while becoming emptier, if you felt that sweet silence behind your routine, then consider this. What if this slowing down isn't a problem to solve? What if it's an initiation? So the practice isn't about reinforcing, it's about stopping resisting correction, about stopping drifting away from the old architecture of the self. Because Sophia doesn't arrive as a new belief, it arrives as a new quality of perception. And you can prepare for it in a simple, but not easy way. First, create a box of silence once a day. It's not a long meditation you'll procrastinate on. Just 2 minutes, no music, no affirmations, no counting breaths. Just one question held gently. What is true now beneath my thoughts? You're not trying to answer intellectually. You're creating a space where wisdom can surface on its own. Because Sophia doesn't speak as a voice. She speaks as recognition. Next comes discernment. Because Sophia is allergic to falsehood. So ask yourself, not out of shame, but out of power. Where am I pretending? Where am I performing? Where am I agreeing with what I don't respect? Where am I living in ways that don't feel like me? And then comes inner union, what I call wisdom and light. The Gnostics didn't treat Sophia and Christ as competent forces. They are a sacred wall. So here's the initiation. When you're stuck in anxiety, confusion, or decision paralysis, don't ask, "What should I do?" Ask two questions instead, one to Sophia, one to Christ. Sophia, what am I not seeing clearly? Christ, what is the next honest step? Wisdom reveals the master. Light reveals the direction. Do this, and you stop being ruled by emotion without becoming cold. You become coherent, and that's when the return accelerates. Because Sophia doesn't return to those who merely believe. She returns to those who become aligned with the truth. And this is what happens. When you consistently do these practices, you begin to perceive the external world changing. Synchronicities increase, and the mask of reality begins to darken. This is no coincidence. It's the pressure of a deeper intelligence entering your field. If you want to apply this to your own life, I've made available a free book called Escaping the Illusion. It's a nostalgic, practical guide for mastering reality, with clear steps you can use. You can access it for free using the link in the description. Sophia's return is not an idea, it's a pattern, a spiritual threshold written in consciousness. First, the soul becomes allergic to the surface, so meaning becomes more important than pleasure. Then their old identities begin to collapse, not as punishment but as correction. And if this is where you are now, if you have felt that strange mystery of sadness and clarity, that silent repulsion for the life you used to tolerate, then it means that something old has already begun to stir within you. But now we come to the final sign, the one Jesus indicated, and the one that marks the point of no return. The final sign is that you have stopped fearing the loss of the false life. This is the moment when the prison loses its grip. This is the moment when you truly change. You've stopped negotiating with the illusion. You stopped asking, "How can I wake up but still keep everything the same?" And instead something deeper passes. You begin to feel it. If this life collapses, so be it. I would rather be truthful than comfortable. And at that moment, Sophia returns. A return of restoration of the inner faculty that cannot be rejected. Wisdom becomes embedded. And when wisdom becomes embedded, your attention shifts. Your choices change. Their relationships change. Their entire reality begins to reorganize itself around coherence. The false world doesn't end through catastrophe. It ends through non-participation. Because when Sophia returns, you no longer reek of distortion with your energy. You no longer give your life force to what is not real. And once this begins, once this current rises in enough people, the world built on confusion begins to collapse under its own emptiness. So here is the question that decides everything. If the signs are already appearing in your life, will you continue to resist correction? Or will you allow wisdom to return completely? If this sparked something in you, comment below. What signs have you already started to notice? And if you want to delve deeper into these hidden texts, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our weekly teachings, because the return isn't coming. It's already happening. And the real battlefield is your attention.